Welcome to the final episode of Moments in Leadership for 2024. This episode is with Fleet Master Chief Dave Isom, the senior enlisted leader at U.S. Indo-Pacific Command and a career Navy SEAL. While there are no new Supercast subscribers since the last episode, I need to give a quick personal thank you to all the Supercast supporters helping out with offsetting the cost of production. Without you and all the supporters helping out, this would be a real challenge. As you know, your contribution to the project helps me defer costs of the episode, so a big thanks out to all of you who stuck with your support. Okay, with that, like I said, this episode is with Fleet Dave Isom. I've been excited about this episode for a while now because it's the first leader from the Navy Special Warfare community who's agreed to be on, and there's just so much for everyone, regardless of service or rank, to learn from his experiences. Fleet Master Chief Dave Isom assumed his current duties as the Command Senior Enlisted Leader for U.S. Indo-Pacific Command on June 30th of 2022. Prior to his current assignment, he served as the Command Senior Enlisted Leader, Special Operations Command Pacific, Command Senior Enlisted Leader, Special Operations Command North, Command Master Chief, Naval Special Warfare Group 10, and Command Master Chief, Special Reconnaissance Team 2. His other assignments include Navy Special Warfare Development Group, unofficially referred to as SEAL Team 6, Joint Special Operations Command, Tactical Development and Evaluation Squadron 1 or TDE-1, and SEAL Team 1. Master Chief Isom enlisted in the Navy in 1987 and attended basic training at Recruit Training Command in Great Lakes, Illinois. Upon completion of training, he reported to the USS Mauna Kea AE-22 and then the USS Mount Hood AE-29, both Kailua-class ammunition ships prior to being selected to attend Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training or BUDS. Master Chief Isom's assignments have included a full range of duties in the SEAL teams, at theater special operations commands, and across the joint environment. His combat and operational deployments include Operation Desert Shield, Operation Desert Storm, Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom, as well as deployments throughout the Pacific and the Horn of Africa. His education and training include the Command Master Chief course, the Joint Special Operations University Senior Enlisted Academy, the U.S. Special Operations Command Summit course, National Defense University's Keystone course, Naval Postgraduate School's Navy Senior Leader Seminar, and the New Flag and Senior Executive Training Symposium. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Strategic Studies from Norwich University. His awards and decorations include the Defense Superior Service Medal, the Legion of Merit, 4 Bronze Stars with Valor Device, 2 Defense Meritorious Service Medals, 2 Meritorious Service Medals, 2 Joint Service Commendation Medals, 2 Navy Marine Corps Commendation Medals, 2 Navy Marine Corps Achievement Medals, and 2 Combat Action Ribbons, the Presidential Unit Citation, and numerous other campaign and service awards. Sorry, one quick thing before I get going with the episode that I noticed after I did the final editing was that Fleet Isom referred to something called soft truths, as in SOF. There's 5 of them, and most notably, the first one is humans are more important than hardware, which is the title of this episode. So if you go to the show notes, I have linked to the US SOCOM website where it lists and defines all 5 of the soft truths that he refers to in this episode. And with that, welcome Fleet Master Chief Dave Isom, Command Senior Enlisted Leader for U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. I'll tell you something I learned from your incredible team there that has set this all up for us. You go by Fleet, like a gunnery sergeant in the Marine Corps goes by Gunny. People say like, "Hey, Fleet."
That's right.
And I had never heard that term. That's awesome. I love that. I love learning that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It's sort of unique in the Navy. You know, you have sort of multiple levels of the Command Master Chief position and job. So you have Command Master Chiefs, you have Force Master Chiefs. So, for example, a close friend of mine, Walter Dittmar, he's the Force Master Chief for Naval Special Warfare. And so his boss is the 2-star that runs all of Naval Special Warfare, and he's considered a Force Master Chief. At the 4-star level, you put on the Fleet Master Chief title. So not something I knew as a young sailor or SEAL, but yeah, pretty interesting.
Yeah. So your buddy doesn't go by Force. He goes by Master Chief.
He goes by Force.
See, that's all interesting. In the Marines, Sergeant Majors, you're just Sergeant Major. In Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps. It's just Sergeant Major. So when I heard somebody refer to you that, I was like, wait, does he actually go by that? Or is that that was very interesting. So
interesting and unique and often very confusing because people don't know whether to call you Master Chief or Command Master Chief or Force Master Chief or Fleet Master Chief. And so I get called everything from CMC to Sergeant Major. And I just go with it. Call me whatever you want, Dave.
That's right. Exactly. Well, hey, thanks for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate this. I'd love to hear first, because it is November 15th. Did you hit any Marine Corps balls? How were they? Where were they?
Yeah, and thanks for having me on, Dave. As you and I talked previously, any chance to focus on leadership development, NCO development, officer development, topics near and dear to my heart. After a lot of years, it's important to share lessons learned and for us to talk about some hard topics, hopefully, and dive into how we do things better. So thanks for giving me this opportunity. I'm honored to be here. So yeah, Marine Corps Ball, the Navy, there was a strike going on down at the hotel that the Navy had booked its ball at. And so the Navy canceled their sort of ball. And so, of course, my wife was a little disappointed. She had a ball dress, ready to go. And so the Mara 4-pack hosted a fairly significant ball. And I think attendance was near 1,000, massive room full of young Marines, old Marines, a few sailors sprinkled in there. And of course, we're out here on the island. So it's a joint force, all living together, working together frequently. So you had representation from across the joint force. And it was just a really amazing event. That was actually my first ever Marine Corps ball at a venue like that with such a large crowd. And it was amazing. The pomp and circumstance, the setting, their execution, precision, as is always expected by the Marine Corps. Just really a phenomenal event. Yeah, it was a great fun.
That's great. Yeah. The big joke is, the Marine Corps birthday is not a holiday. I'm like, yes, it is. You just don't understand it. You don't get it. So, and next year, is our 250th, which is just going to be, forget it. We're going to start telling people about that in March. People are going to know. So it's really great. As a matter of fact, next month, I'm going to the U.S. Mint up in Philadelphia because the Treasury, this was an act of Congress. Literally, they passed an act of Congress to mint a coin for the Marine Corps' 250th birthday. And Mint usually does 2 a year. And they knew the demand was going to be so high that they're only doing 1 this year. They're going to put all the production into this. And I'm going to go up when they stamp the very first coin. It's going to be really cool. So I'm excited about that.
That's pretty cool. So, yeah. Marine Corps is, I've watched them operate for a long time now, and they really have a incredible presence up in the DC area, incredible relationships with Congress, with staff and others, and of course, tremendous respect that they've earned. So that's cool to see that they're going to do a coin. That's great.
Yeah, it's really good. So, well, you know what I wasn't able to tell? So I just read your bio, and what I couldn't tell from the bio was, because you came in the Navy around the same time I came in the Marine Corps. Did you have to do a different boot camp and go have a different rate before you came into the Navy Special Warfare community? Did you do something before you went to BUD/S?
I did, yeah. So the traditional route back then, different from today, is you had to go through boot camp and go to a Navy A school and earn the equivalent of an MOS, become something. There were source ratings that SEALs would be drawn out of. You could be a hospital corpsman, an engineman, a machinist mate, a thing, and then off to BUD/S after that, and sometimes with some mandatory service in the Navy, which I did. So I did about 4 years in 2 different ships, 2 different commands. I was a machinist mate, so learned how to work on engine room equipment, all the auxiliary equipment on a ship, did 2 Westpac deployments, and then off to BUD/S after that. Now we have a model a little bit like the Green Berets and their 18 X-ray program, where you can get a contract straight from boot camp and right into BUD/S, because BUD/S was given the same equivalency of an MOS. So now we created our own rate in the Navy, it's called. So you have the SO rating, which is like a HM as a hospital corpsman. And so because of that, you can go straight into your A school equivalent and right into the community from there.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I remember those days because on my first MU deployment, the Navy SEAL team that was there had that old structure. So there were SEALs that had different MOS or rates. I just remember that being, and I just thought, gosh, that's not really a smart way to do things. And it sounds like that got fixed really quick. But I do remember them all talking about that.
I'll tell you, I think the verdict is still out. I'm not sure which model is better. I will say this, I showed up at SEAL Team 1, and I was in a platoon full of folks who had skill sets outside of just being a SEAL. And so if you deployed as a platoon and you needed something done, you needed a thing, had a requirement, there's a good chance that someone in your platoon might be trained as an electronics technician or a a hospital corpsman or an engineman, or may have another skill set, not just SEAL operator. And that was pretty handy as we were deploying out into the Western Pacific and working with partner nations. At times, you might find yourself in some remote places, and you might not have electricity, or you might have some challenges with the place that you're being housed in. And so it was pretty handy to have someone who might have been a CB or some other rating previously in their life. So I'm not sure which model's best. It's the model we have though, and it seems to be working. So I'll support it.
Yeah, that's great. So how many years did you do in the regular, I'm just going to call it the regular Navy, before you went to BUDS? A couple years? A few?
Yeah, and enlisted in '87, went through boot camp and through a school, a lengthy A school, with a follow-on required commitment of 4 years. So I did 4 years total on 2 different ships, and then off to BUDS in 1994.
Okay, interesting. I'm particularly curious about the first few years that you had in the Navy then, because my leading question that I always like to kick the podcast off with is, 100% of us start out as an E1 or an O1, but then only 1% make it 30 or 40 years like you have. And I'm curious if you can tell me some stories about those first few years of your career before you ended up going to BUDS, and that you look back on as crystallizing moments through the lens of where you are now as Fleet Master Chief.
Yeah, I'll go all the way back to boot camp. We had a chief as our company commander in boot camp. He was unique. He empowered me. So I was a little bit older when I showed up for boot camp. I'd already been to college for a couple of years, worked out in the outside. And so when I showed up, I had a couple of years of life under my belt, and he recognized that. And so he selected me to be the RCPO, the Recruit Chief Petty Officer. So the boot camp kid kind of leading the other boot camp kids. He put an immense amount of trust, delegation of authority, and empowerment into me very early on, to include having me move the boot camp company from place to place without him being there, just meeting us at our final destinations and marching around Great Lakes, just trusting that we could get it right. And it was an incredible experience for me as a young leader, just coming into the military and having that sort of responsibility put on my shoulders, but also seeing a demonstration, him living it, showing what trust and empowerment and delegation and what that can do, how it empowered me and made me feel. I never forgot that was an important aspect of one of the things I respected most about him, that I felt made him a great leader. And so I took that with me, and wherever I can, I try to emulate that. I try to empower young leaders and give them their chance to shine and help them become those leaders that they want to be. And I think that has stuck with me my whole career.
That's a great answer. And I can relate to that too, because I think no matter how basic it is, right? You're in recruit training and you're moving men and women from one place to another. But at that moment in your life, it's probably the most important thing you've ever done or are doing at the time. And then when you do it right and you get recognized for it, even if it's something basic like that, I think there's so much developmental power to that. That's a great story. Thanks for sharing that with me. How about now you get out in the fleet and you're checking into your first ship, and you're probably, hey, here's your leading petty officer, right? Here's your chief petty officer. Here's your ensign. What were some of your memories of those early leaders in your career?
Yeah, at that time, and I assume the Fleet Navy is still very similar today, but at that time, divisions and work centers were all usually led by a fairly senior chief petty officer, either E7 or E8 level leader with a tremendous amount of experience, time at sea, understanding of their technical skill sets, how to lead people, with a LPO, leading petty officer, that usually E6 worked right below them. On one of those 2 ships I went to, I had a fairly weak chief petty officer, and I think, he just had things in his personal life going on that were pulling him away and distracting him, and maybe some health issues. And for various reasons, he just was not a present and engaged leader. But what I learned from that scenario the most was watching the LPO, the E6, who basically stepped up and took charge of the work center and essentially ran day-to-day actions and activities flawlessly and shouldered all those responsibilities, things that normally would have been done by that chief. That E6 took that on, and just led brilliantly. And I learned a lot watching him as he shouldered those additional responsibilities. And it really taught me that initiative, drive, motivation, those are some of the critical factors when it comes to leading, especially if you're maybe having to lead one level up and you're not that chief yet. But he was certainly someone that I thought, hey, that guy is going to be a chief and a senior chief and a master chief someday, because he had the right willingness to take on that responsibility, willingness to shoulder those additional burdens, and to just do it with excellence every day.
Oh, that's great. What do you remember about the relationship between the division officer and the chief and the leading petty officer? Does anything stand out to you about what worked with that relationship, what didn't work with that relationship?
The division officer was obviously fairly junior in the model and the construct for the ship that I was on. I think it's different depending on which command you're at. But the ship I was on, we had a very junior, fairly green division officer, and that division officer recognized that they had shortcomings, they had a lot of gaps, and relied tremendously on the chief, the E6 LPO, on me as a work center supervisor at the E5 level. Really impressive to see that level of trust from a young officer, because I know that can be often disempowering when you feel you're at a deficit and you feel like you have to prove your ability to be a leader. But that willingness to really lean hard on the expertise of those technical experts and their leadership skills, I was just really impressed by that.
I like hearing that. One of the things I like to say on the podcast, and anybody who's been listening to it for a while has heard me say it before, but your boss was an ensign at some point, and some leading petty officer and some chief set him up for success by teaching him lessons really early on in his career. And the Commandant of the Marine Corps, Eric Smith, right? Like, he was a second lieutenant at some point and had a platoon sergeant who was a staff sergeant. And you just never know who's in your command and who you're actually mentoring. But those formative relationships that happen in the very early part of a career are so important. And I think that the E6, E7 level, regardless of the service branch, are just the backbone of officer development in a way that maybe we don't really even talk about that much.
Yeah, I think the Navy does a great job of talking about it and talking about that role, especially of the chief petty officer and the chief's mess, and the importance of mentoring those young officers, which is absolutely critical. You get those really young junior officers that show up to a ship, maybe without a lot of depth and breadth, and the ability for a seasoned chief to take that young officer under their wing and to show them the ropes and help them fill in their gaps and make them stronger leaders is a really important model that I think exists fairly well out there in the Navy fleet, and certainly in the SEAL teams. You have platoons with a similar construct of a chief, or in some cases even a senior chief that's been around the block a lot of times, may have a ton of deployments under their belt, and they'll take that young platoon commander or assistant platoon commander and help them become the leaders that they need to be for our nation and for that platoon. And like you said, you never know who you're mentoring. Next thing you know, that young platoon commander becomes Admiral McCraven, and he's leading all of
Right.
SOCOM.
Yeah, that's exactly, because he was an ensign at some point, right? Any other formative moments from your early part of your career before you transitioned over into Buds and started that journey?
Yeah, I was incredibly fortunate to have the right leaders at the right time in my life and in my career, who were very willing to give me a chance to lead and to put that responsibility on me over and over again. And so fast forward to the second ship that I was on, we were approaching a large inspection that was critical pre-deployment, had to pass it, and we had a major casualty of a piece of equipment. Totally lost a large compressor from the AC system, and it required a fairly significant overhaul. And no one had done it before in the crew that we had there, but we broke out all of the tech manuals, we got the right pieces and parts to do it, and essentially did a complete overhaul of that thing as the inspection was beginning. And so the inspectors saw this, they knew this was happening, and we knew we had a limited window to get that piece of equipment up and running, completely overhauled. Think of like a large engine overhaul, and up online to demonstrate it to those inspectors. And my LPO and my chief, they turned it over to me as sort of that E5 work center supervisor and a couple of young E4s. And we tore that thing down, rebuilt it, worked through the night, massive amounts of hours and time rotating and getting people in there working on it, going through all the checks and getting it up in time to have the inspectors see that it worked, pass the inspection so that we could deploy. And again, just a demonstration of having the right leaders, the right people willing to trust that you can do something, putting that level of responsibility on you and letting you run with it full speed. That's such a huge impact on young leaders. And to this day, whenever I can, I want to give folks as much as I can pile in their ruck and let them just amaze me with their brilliance, because that's what they do every day.
That's awesome. Now I'm reflecting back on you and I talking about me saying maybe, they got it fixed, not doing that fleet time and the experience. Just listening to you for the past 15 minutes makes me realize that maybe there is some benefit to everybody doing 4 years before they come in. I'm not suggesting that they go back to that, but I could see where the benefit was to that, what the advantages were to that, because all of that experience that you had, and then you jumped the fence and went over to the Navy Special Warfare community, you were bringing a lot of real world fleet experience with you.
And it proved to be valuable. Every time we would end up on a ship, I knew how a ship worked. I knew inside and out how to move around a ship. It proved to be valuable over and over again. I think the big challenge was when you have all those different source ratings and you're trying to manage careers of all the SEALs that come from all those different source ratings, and they're trying to test and to promote and to learn maybe skills that they didn't get a chance to develop early on, but it's a requirement for that specific MOS or rate. So it made it really challenging managing all of that. So I think in the end, it's the right thing. We now have very focused learning for SOs, for SEALs, that teaches you the things that a SEAL needs to know. That's how you test. That's how you promote. There's certainly goodness in that. But yeah, I think there's something to be said for all those secondary skills that everyone brought to the table back under the old model.
Yeah, and maybe some maturity too. But so last question here, but now with the popularity of the Navy SEAL community, people who are going to BUDS, they know a lot. They have prep courses and everything to get in shape. But here you are like, hey, boss, I want to be a Navy SEAL. And you're on some ship somewhere. Like, how the hell did you get ready to go to BUDS being on a ship? Like, just physically.
Yeah. Again, lucky. Throughout my life and my career, I've been lucky. I think I have a horseshoe in my back pocket, because I'll tell you, I had a command master chief on the ship who was into fitness. He made sure that there was a functional gym on the ship, which not all ships have any type of a gym that's very impressive, but he made sure that it was stocked with the right level of equipment. And I told him early on what I wanted to do, and he liked it. He was excited about it, and he tried to help me at every opportunity. So he made sure that I had a place and the time. And of course, he was mentoring me, and we spent a lot of time working out together and talking about leadership development. And I think that was, again, just having the right leaders at the right time can be so critical in the development of anyone out there. And I was lucky. I was lucky to have great leaders and be surrounded by great teammates my whole career.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to hear the story about. I was just posting the other day about, in the ladder of life, it's a lot easier to reach down and pull somebody up than it is to reach up and try to pull other people down. And it sounds like that's what your enlisted, your chief was doing for you to get you ready to go. But then eventually you go, right? You're there, you're checking in a Coronado, and I'm sure it looks a lot different now than when you were there. And most people, I'll say most people who are interested in or are interested in the military have seen some or all of that TV show about the BUDS class, right? And of course, if they've only seen a little bit of it, it's memorialized the hurry up, don't fall back. I say it's my wife in the grocery store now, and I think it's kind of memorialized that, it's become part of the modern military lexicon, if you will. So everybody knows that BUDS is hard, right? Everybody knows that graduates learn lessons like don't quit, push through the pain, mind over matter. But I'm curious, what are some of the less obvious leadership lessons that you learned at BUDS?
Once again, I was, I guess, fortunate in some ways, or you might call it unfortunate. I was the class LPO because I showed up with a little bit of time under my belt and some rank and experience. And so I was quickly thrown into a position of leadership.
The spotlight.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Between the class, officer in charge and myself, we got a lot of extra attention and not always good.
And that was probably a lieutenant that was alongside you as an O3 lieutenant, probably, as the class leader?
Yes, he was. That's right. Yes,
Okay.
sir. I think I would hone in on the fact that at Buds, not only is the success of the class important, especially if you're in that OIC position and that LPO position, but you get assigned a boat crew, you're part of a small team, and you get assigned a swim buddy. And so there's these layers of leadership and layers of teamwork and layers of accountability, holding yourself accountable and holding your swim buddy accountable, working together as a two-person team, and the importance of having that accountability for each other, and then expand that upwards to the boat crew where you have now a team of 6, 7, 8 all working together. And so those lessons in the importance of teamwork and accountability, and of course, if you're the OIC of the class or if you're the LPO of the class, then now that additional responsibility carried up to the next level of, hey, not only do I want to be successful, and I want to make sure my swim buddy is successful, and I want to make sure my boat crew is successful. Well, now I'm thinking about the success of the whole class, and how do I keep us as a class from getting that extra attention that's going to make for longer days and more pain, more cold, more misery? What things can I do? So that really, it changes the way you think about life a little bit when you're concerned about more than just yourself.
I'm going to jump ahead in your career because I kind of want to ask the same question, but Buds is hard. And when the sailors graduate from there and then their additional training, they eventually become qualified Navy SEALs. I may be getting the terminology wrong, but you understand what I'm getting at. But then you also assessed into development group, and without disclosing too much, because that's not what I'm asking here, but it's almost the same question. So what were some of the less obvious lessons that you learned then when you go through a whole nother assessment where you've already said like, hey, I just proved that I'm the 1% of the 1%. And now you go, what were some of the leadership lessons? Because you're more mature, a lot more experienced, but there had to be some learning in that environment too.
Yeah, tremendous learning for me. I show up and I thought I was pretty good. I was a SEAL. I had done a few deployments out into the Western Pacific as a SEAL. I had deployed a few times before that. I had been to college a couple of years. I had a lot of life under my belt. Sniper, accomplished sniper, went to the Marine Corps' MSPF, Maritime Special Purpose Force sniper course, and myself and the other SEAL, we were ranked 1 and 2 coming out of that course. So I thought I was pretty good. And I showed up for that selection course for development group, and I realized, man, there is some incredible talent out there, and they're all way better than me. I'm going to have a hard time keeping up with these guys. So a little dose of, I think, humility showing up there and just seeing what incredible SEALs existed. Guys I didn't know from other teams, from the opposite coast where I was assigned, just incredibly talented, fast, strong, brilliant, incredible leaders of their own in their own right. Yeah, I think probably the biggest thing right off the bat was, hey, wake up every day with a little bit of humility.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine that be true because you're looking to your left and your right at Buds. You could probably say, like, that guy may not make it. That guy may not make it. And you're there and you're like, all these guys have already made it right alongside with me. And now we got to make it again. I got to imagine there was some pretty interesting, formative lessons there. So thanks for sharing that with me. Again, don't want you to disclose too much. I did think that there had to be some compare and contrast opportunity there between the two different environments.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, again, I always go back to the word lucky. It pays to be lucky. I was lucky that early on, leadership heaped onto my shoulders early on in boot camp. And then again and again, I think that really helped develop how I thought about myself, how I thought about others, how I would prioritize my efforts every day, the things that I'd focus on, and really shaped how I thought about the world. And so I just say, hey, I'm just really lucky. I've had some great leaders and some great teammates that have helped me be successful. And I'm just excited that I'm even still here today and still able to keep serving after 37 years.
Yeah. Well, I consider myself pretty lucky too, but I'll tell you something else that I subscribe to, and you'll have to tell me if you agree with this, but I also feel that luck is the residual of experience and preparation. You can't get lucky if you don't have those two things working in tandem with each other. I suppose there's some luck like, geez, I almost got rear-ended, but I got out of the way at the nick of time. That's statistical luck. But sometimes luck is just what's left over after you're properly prepared and you've got a lot of experience.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think sometimes when bullets are flying overhead, there's a little bit of luck that one of those doesn't impact you, right? So there's certainly a level of luck that helped to get me to where I am today, and I'm just I'm thankful for those lucky moments, and again thankful for the leaders and teammates I've been surrounded with, because we all kind of stand on the shoulders of giants every day.
So going back to some of your earlier career, and this could be post Buds, you're in. I think you said you started out in SEAL Team 1. I'm just curious if there are times, I know senior leaders are pretty humble about yourself, and I'm sure you fall into that category, but I'm going to ask you to try to come outside of your comfort zone a little bit and tell me about a time. Do you remember the very first time that you were really proud of yourself? And then I'm going to follow that up with a question of like, do you have a memory of any sort of like, geez, I'm really disappointed in myself for that one thing?
First time really proud of myself, I would even go back to that ship time frame when we were able to make that inspection. That was really important, and I was really proud of not just myself, but the whole team that came together and worked incredible hours beyond their skill set at times, pushing themselves and thinking through some hard problems to get us to success. So that's one of the early moments that really sticks with me. And then as a SEAL, at SEAL Team 1, being a sniper, going to sniper school, going over to the Marines MSPF course and doing really well there with my other SEAL teammate. There's these little moments all through my time as a SEAL there at SEAL Team 1 where I could point to and say, hey, got it right, went really well. But probably what I'd want to talk about more is all the times that I got it wrong, which is pretty frequently as well. I don't think, soft truth number one, that's humans are more important than hardware. And so you'll hear General Fenton and Sergeant Major Shane Shorter over at SOCOM talk about soft truth number one pretty frequently. I don't think I had a full appreciation for that early on. I didn't have an appreciation for the importance to focus on the human. Whenever I was the senior person in the room, early on as a leader, I didn't put that at the forefront of every thought in the ways that I should have. I missed opportunities to help develop others, help develop young leaders, take care of people, focus on the human dynamic and understand what they're going through and maybe have a little empathy and to fully try to understand what was going on in their lives. I just didn't, as a young leader, I think I was just immature and didn't have the insight to think like that. If I was going to point my finger at one huge failure, it took me a long time to grow up and gain a level of maturity that helped me see others differently and to put that human sort of aspect at the forefront of everything I try to do.
Yeah, I share that sentiment. I have a question I ask a lot of people. You'd probably say the same thing if I asked you the question, but if I look back on my career, I like to ask people like, is there a period of time in your career where you'd want to do a do-over? If somebody asked me that question, my response would be every single second I was on active duty, I'd like to have a do-over on. Because my lens is now as a 57-year-old, I'm looking back at my 20-something-year-old self and saying, first of all, I had no idea how much fun I was having. Second of all, if I could do it all over again through my lens of maturity, I'd be a completely different person. I don't know if that would have made me a better officer, but I would have been a different person. So I completely relate to what you just said.
Yeah, I don't know that I want a do-over because certainly those experiences are hard-learned lessons and they help forge you and shape you and develop how you think, right? So I might not be the same person I am today had I done things differently or if I had a do-over. So I think even though some of those lessons were painful and I look back with great regret at times, I think it was just part of the maturing process to becoming a leader and becoming the person, the human being that I am today. So I think I needed that. I think I needed to fail, and I think I needed to be able to recognize those failures to think differently today.
Mm-hmm. Who were some of the more formative leaders in the early part of your Navy SEAL career? I'm thinking specifically like your Well, you may have even been the leading petty officer by the time I don't know. I don't know how that would have worked. I don't know what rank you were, but at least your chief or your O3 lieutenant, or maybe your assistant platoon commander, the probably an ensign, Lieutenant JG. Talk to me
Yeah.
about some of those people and how instrumental they were in your life, or not.
Yeah, at SEAL Team 1, I was, again, incredibly lucky and fortunate to have a LPO who had multiple deployments and deep experience. He probably was just slow in his career progression to promote. Had he been a fast mover, he certainly was talented, skilled, and working at the level of a E7 or E8 very easily, and could have been leading the entire platoon, which he did, frankly. I mean, he had such depth and breadth of knowledge and experience in every single category of every single thing that we did, because he had done it all, and he had so many deployments under his belt. And so he taught me to appreciate what, for one, how little I actually knew, and then two, the importance of learning at every single opportunity. You know, I might have been the first lieutenant department responsible for the boats and the engines, the small boats, the Zodiacs. And that was my focus day in and day out, was making sure that we were ready. We had the right boats, the right motors, the gas, everything was working great. But I could not ignore all those other things. The air rep, you know, as he would prepare for jumps and for boat drops, other things, the communications. I had to focus on all those other things. That was sort of beat into me, the importance of it, every day that I saw that LPO operate, because there wasn't a thing that he didn't know. He was just that talented, and he was that influential of a leader because of that depth of experience.
Yeah, that's great. At that point in your career, how about some of the more senior enlisted SEALs in the team command? I'm thinking specifically like the command master chief. Was there a lot of interaction with? Did he have a mentoring role with the young SEALs in the team? Like, what was your interaction with some of the more senior enlisted in the team structure?
Yeah, I think that has improved over time. I think the SEAL community, like the Navy, probably has gotten better. I did not have a lot of interaction with the command master chief specifically. There were a couple of very senior master chiefs and those that were, you know, right on the tail end of being the Vietnam era SEALs, and they had a lot of experience. And so whenever you could, you'd be soaking up everything they said to learn from all those years of experience. But frankly, the echelons above you, you don't always interact with them much. And so my direct, those that influenced me the most were right there in my platoon, whether it was the LPO, the chief, and the OIC, as well as a
Mhm.
number of other SEALs who were not the LPO, but they had done multiple deployments and they had all that experience at SEAL Team 1. They were the ones that were pouring all the time and effort, energy, and knowledge into me to try and make me a better SEAL. That's really where I learned early on anything that mattered as a SEAL and as a leader was at that level in my platoon.
Right. What rank in years were those first few? Early 90s?
94 to 98 at SEAL Team 1 as
Okay.
an E5 primarily.
Okay. Did you go over to development group after that, or did you stay? What did you do after that 94 to 98 time period? Is that when you went over?
98 was selection for development group. That's right.
Okay. Did you ever go back to the regular teams after that?
My next trip back was as a command master chief.
Okay. How were you different as a command master chief when you went back to the teams after that experience in development group, as it relates to just some of the other command master chiefs that you saw when you were younger and growing up?
Sure. Yeah. Once again, being lucky and being fortunate to have some unique opportunities there at development group, I had a lot of exposure to some really, really great support staff and supporting rates who combat support and others, non-SEALs, who were just incredibly talented, smart, technically talented, great leaders, all of them. And so it developed a level of appreciation in me that I'm not sure early on when I was a young SEAL, I don't think that the command master chiefs and others maybe thought about the support in the way that I did. I think it was a very SEAL centric mindset, and that's fine. But I know that without our massive tail, that's predominantly all of those supporting assets from all the different rates that we pull from the conventional Navy, without that, we couldn't do our job. They're just so critical. And really, I saw just how incredibly professional and talented they were. And so when I went back out to the theater soft side to be a command master chief, I looked at those folks very differently. And fortunately, I was at special reconnaissance team, and being at an SRT, there's a large number of support folks there. A lot of CTs, a lot of ETs, ITs, others. It's a lot of the support that provides support to a SEAL team. And so honing in on that, working with those young leaders, seeing them and fully seeing them for how capable they were. I'm not sure I would have had that had I spent all of my time out in a theater soft SEAL team. I think it was really valuable that I got that time inside a development group where I did have a lot of exposure to all those supporting assets.
Yeah. What was your relationship with your commanding officer when you were the command master chief back at the teams? Was it a hand in glove relationship? Did you have delineated responsibilities, or did you work together, or did you each have your own lane and kind of stuck to it?
Yeah, both. He and I traveled a lot together. We became really close friends. We still keep in touch today. I had a tremendous amount of respect for him. He was a incredibly talented leader, a really big brain, deep thinker. I can't say enough great things about him. And he trusted me. He empowered me. He gave me a lot of maneuver space to lead in the ways that I thought I wanted to lead and to get after things that I wanted to pursue. He was just a really complimentary leader at a great time in my life where I was honored to get to serve with him. And we were I think we saw the world differently at times, but we had a tremendous amount of respect for each other and our differing opinions. And so we just worked really well together. And I think that's why the command relationship is so important, because that, of course, affects the tone and the morale and the impact downward on the whole command. It's important to have that kind of a relationship and to see it every day out on display so that others see that is important.
Yeah, I agree. Somebody asked me recently. I get the question a lot. It's wrapped up in the "What have I learned from the podcast?" It's most questions are kind of covered with that umbrella. And somebody asked me, how do you know that you're doing a good job as a leader? And I'm like, well, in the moment, you don't. Like, nobody's going to come up to you and say, like, you're a great commanding officer. You're a great command master chief. Nobody's going to come up and say those things to you. So in the moment, you won't know. But the way you'll know later is by how many people from that command want to stay in touch with you. And that's when you get your answer. So when you say that you stayed in touch with your commanding officer and you're still really great friends, I mean, that is the litmus test for how good of a leader the two of you were and the two of you work together.
I'll tell you another metric I try to use, and it is, hey, how many folks are still in the military that worked for you and they've promoted and they're doing well in their career? If you were able to influence their success in any small way, then that's certainly I think a measure of your own leadership. And so to see, to be invited to a promotion ceremony or to see someone promoting officer or enlisted and to bump into them and see them still being successful, that's often a moment of great pride for me. I may not have been there to shape their entire career, but at least I had a small touch point, and hopefully it was a positive experience for them and it helped make them a better leader for our nation and for our military.
That is very true. With good leadership, though, comes bad leadership. No matter how long you're in the military, you're going to see it somewhere at some level. And I'm curious because I feel like some of the best lessons that you can learn come from some of the worst leaders you are ever around. And I'm wondering if you've got a story or not names, of course, but just what was the best leadership lesson you learned from your worst leader or the worst leader that you saw?
Yeah, that's a great question, and certainly shaped me and how I thought about what I brought up earlier, which is humans being more important than hardware. Soft truth number one. I had a enlisted leader who was really good at getting things across the finish line. talented, smart, high energy, aggressive, very successful, promoting, hitting all the marks, doing really great, really successful at achieving the desired results, getting the outcomes, getting the wins on any project, anything that might have been thrown at him, he could get it done. But there was a chance that on that path to success, you might find some teammates' bodies behind him as he ran over people, ran through people to get to whatever that point of success was that he was driving towards. And no one wanted to cross him, of course, because he was, he received great accolades for his ability to get things done. And of course, when you're successful, people throw more things at you because you're getting it done, right? And so he was well respected and well liked, but no one wanted to cross him because they knew that he was a powerful personality. You didn't want to cross him and end up on the wrong side of that relationship. But yeah, you could find junior personnel that worked really, really hard helping him get to success, and it took a lot out of them. It wore people down and left a trail of bodies. And so that just reinforced soft truth number one for me as I thought about how I wanted to lead. I want to get the win. I want to be successful. I want to accomplish the mission. But at the same time, you gotta take care of people.
Right. But that also begs the question that somebody was in charge of that person, an officer and maybe a chief or somebody senior. What's some advice that you have? I'm just going to ask you to give the advice to an officer because I can kind of relate to that maybe better and ask a follow-up question. But what's the advice that you have from that to an officer who is seeing something like that happen? Because that is a tough situation, right? You've got an incredibly talented person who probably, as an officer, that person probably knows more than you do about all the technical aspects of it. But then again, like you're the officer, you're kind of in charge, and maybe there should have been somebody put their finger on that situation. Any advice for an officer who could find themselves in that position in your community? Because I'll bet you it exists.
I think first advice would be you have to know, you have to see it, you have to be present, you have to be digging down into those levels below you, and sometimes that's hard to do. You don't want to get in someone else's Wheaties. You don't want to get too far down in the weeds. And if someone's appears to be doing well, everything seems okay, and you're moving in the directions that you need to move, you might miss that. You might not see that trail of bodies or that negative impact that person is having. So I think, be an engaged leader. Take the time not just to talk to the level of leadership just below you, but take those moments to get down further into it, talk to folks about what they're doing, how things are going, and probe. Take the time to probe and fully understand. And I think if you talk to folks often enough, you start to see them, you see their face, when they look like things are going well. Maybe you can pick up on when they look like things are not going well. And this ties into the discussion we often have about suicide in today's military. It's really important for leaders to be engaged and to be talking to their people at multiple levels to see how they're doing and to fully understand it. Because it's easy just to stay at your level and only talk maybe one level down and to think that things are going well. But sometimes you find out the hard way that things are not going as well. So I would say, be an engaged leader, be there. In the Navy, they use the term deck plates. So be a deck plate leader, be down there on the deck plates, talking to folks, seeing and fully understanding everything that's going on.
In the Marine Corps, we say this, take care of your Marines, take care of your sailors. We say those things all the time. I think every leader out there, enlisted or officer, needs to take stock of what does that actually mean? What does taking care of your Marines or your sailors really mean? Because when I was learning to be an officer very early on in my career, I would have answered that question by saying like, hey, make sure they're getting good chow, go inspect the chow halls, make sure they're getting paid, make sure their administration is right. Okay. Yeah. And then there's so much after that that I think people should really be thinking very seriously about what that means to be taking care of your people. And you said it, which is knowing when somebody's off. That suicide, it's a big deal. And I think that's a people skill, figuring that stuff out and seeing the early warning signs. That's EQ, as they say.
Yeah. I don't know that everyone's born with that. Sometimes it takes, again, leaders that trust you enough to put you in charge and let you fail forward, and give you a second chance. And you learn through those speed bumps and those rough experiences. And so there's certainly some maturity and time and learning from those failures that's probably important. So it goes back to your question about the do-over, and the importance maybe of having leaders that have failed and learned from it. They sometimes become the best leaders.
Yeah, I had a previous guest on, Admiral Bill Murs, who's retired, but he was a submariner. God, he just had this fascinating. I will never forget it. It was listening to him tell me the story, but he talks about how they, in the submarine community, they remediate people who make mistakes. And I think to myself, my God, I can't think of a single time where anybody ever talked about remediating people who did something wrong in the military. And it just dawned on me. I was like, bam, remediate. I do it in my civilian world all the time. Why didn't we do a better job of it in the military? And you're right. I think that failing forward and giving people the opportunity to learn from their mistakes. There's those mistakes of commission and omission. I get them mixed up all the time, but one's bad and one's okay. And but letting people learn from those things and remediating people through. I say this all the time. If in the artillery community, if you have a section chief who's in charge of a howitzer and they do something wrong and they fire the round and it doesn't go where it's supposed to go, they generally get relieved along with the battery commander. You remediate those two, and I'll guarantee you're creating the safest battery commander and the safest section chief in the artillery community in the entire world. But we tend to just move on from people like that. I'm sorry, we got way off on a tangent there, but
no, that's a good tangent though.
Yeah.
And it dives a little bit into the idea that hey, we don't live in a zero defect world, right? There's going to be mistakes. It is inevitable. We are human. People are going to make mistakes. I'm going to screw up when I leave this podcast today. I'm sure I'll do something wrong, and I will learn from that mistake. And we can't live with this idea that it's a zero defect world. The idea of remediation and helping others not only recognize their mistakes, but maybe helping paint a path forward for them and with them that helps show them the way to success. Learn from that mistake, help them learn from it, help them become better leaders from that mistake they made.
Right. You have a really unique perspective on things just because of who you are, where you came from, and what you're doing now, and how you ascended to the level of command that you're at right now. So after watching thousands of emerging leaders over your career, officer and enlisted, what are some of the classic decisive points of their careers, and what decisions lead to their successes, and what decisions lead to them struggling in their career?
Part of it, again, I go back to soft truth number one. I think great leaders, some people do, they pick this up earlier. And again, some of it is, as you described, as EQ. I think good leaders early on recognize the importance of the human factor, of taking care of people. We have some phenomenal, incredible capabilities in orbit and under the sea and flying through the air every day, sailing ships out at sea. Just incredible technology and equipment. None of that works without the person, without the human being. And so many young leaders, I think, that are successful, they realize early on that they got to take care of their people first. I think that's probably as important as being a lifelong learner. I think if you think you've arrived, if you think you know it all, you're going to fail. You're already failing. You've got to be a lifelong learner, because I don't care how many stars you have on your collar or on your uniform, you don't know it all. You need that team around you. You need to have an environment and a culture where that team can tell you that they think that you're wrong, that team can talk about your failures or your mistakes. And to have that kind of a culture at every level, that's how we get better. That's how we get better. You got to have a culture where people can feel free to talk about the mistakes that you're making and to confront you with that and to talk to you about it, even if you're wearing 4 stars on your uniform, right? That's, to me, those are the best leaders that I've seen throughout my career, young or old. They're lifelong learners. They value people, and they admit with humility that they're making mistakes. They're going to continue to make mistakes, and they'll try every day to get better and make it better. And they're going to rely on that team around them to help them be better.
Enjoying Moments in Leadership? Help the project get more guests and reach more listeners by leaving a 5-star rating and a quick review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It takes like 5 or 10 seconds to do it, and the reviews really help me to continue bringing inspiring stories from senior military leaders. Additionally, when guests see it's popular or hear about it around their commands, it really helps me to get them on as guests. Finally, if you're able to chip in a little bit to help with the project, please head over to my Supercast support page, which can be found through the link in the show notes, because every little bit helps. Now back to the pod. Yeah, follow-up question to that, because I agree with all of that, but knowing that there's a time and a place for the issuance of a direct order that has to be immediately followed, right? A combat situation comes to mind as an example. As leaders, should we be setting the conditions to encourage more collaboration between junior levels of leadership in a unit, one that sets a climate of providing useful feedback instead of, hey, because I said so? And that question comes from because I'm reflecting back on an episode that I had with Admiral Ron Boxall, who spoke about issuing orders as a carrier strike group commanding officer and asking very junior people on the deck, like you said, on the deck blades, do you agree? And does this make sense? And I think there's so much leadership genius in that, but it's one thing when you're an established admiral or a fleet and you ask it and a second lieutenant or an ensign asks it. The junior leader risks looking unknowledgeable or weak and can lose the respect of his unit. So is there some way for a junior emerging leader to overcome that?
Yeah, I love that, by the way. I think that's awesome. Yes, we should have a collaborative environment. Yes, we should have junior team members that can provide input and speak up and speak out. I think that's the key to our success. I think it's one of the things, it's more of the Western model of military and style of military. If you look at what's happening in Ukraine right now, I guarantee you there are some young squad leaders, NCOs that are out there leading in ways that makes them very different than their Russian counterparts that are across the battle line there. And so I think that's critical, the collaborative environment. For young leaders, I think, again, developing a relationship with I think the Army and the Marine Corps does this really well. They tell young officers, go find your command sergeant major, go find your gunny, go find your platoon sergeant, and glue yourself to that person and learn from them. That approach can be really powerful, because if you really want to make an impact on your platoon or your team as a young officer, having a experienced, seasoned gunny or command sergeant major who can come over the top after you say something with their depth and breadth of experience that obviously has earned an incredible amount of respect from the entire unit, for them to back up what you just said, that can be pretty empowering for a young junior officer. So I would encourage junior officers, pair up with those senior enlisted leaders at every moment, maybe rehearse and talk about what it is that you want to talk about the message, the thing you're trying to communicate, and see if they agree with you. And if they do agree, then maybe request them to come over the top and, highlight their support for what you're talking about. And that can be pretty empowering, especially when junior enlisted members see that, seasoned Master Chief or gunny or sergeant major coming over the top and saying, yeah, that's right. Did you hear what that young officer just said? That's spot on. That's 100%. And you all better pay attention to that.
Yeah, that is spot on. I'm curious, at your level of seniority, are you still mentoring other senior enlisted or officers? I just know you're in a bubble, right? I get it. Like I saw you have a staff and everything, but so you're in a little bit of a bubble. But do you ever get to break out of that bubble a little bit? And do you have a few that you're mentoring or paying attention to on a daily basis?
It's a passion for me. And so I try to do as much as possible. My calendar drives, battle rhythm events drive a lot of my daily existence, but wherever I can squeeze in either point-to-point connectivity and mentoring with others, I try to do that. When I can do it in larger groups, whether it's an all-hands type of an event. Just yesterday, we went with the Hawaii National Guard. I asked them, their senior enlisted leader, to host one of my quarterly component senior enlisted leader sort of roundtables. And I've done this with multiple components. And so the command sergeant major over at Mar 4-Pack Marines hosted us out at K-Bay. Phenomenal event. They provide a brief overview of what their service, what their component is doing in theater, and it really broadens the perspectives and awareness across all the component senior enlisted leaders who show up for that event. And so that's a great opportunity for me to engage with those component senior enlisted leaders, to share what we're doing here at INDOPACOM, to do a little bit of mentoring and development. And so I did that with the Hawaii National Guard yesterday as well. And that senior enlisted leader hosted us. We brought all of the command sergeant majors and others from the components together, and just had a great event. And there's a lot of mentoring that happens in those sessions. And then I'll tell you, I go even further than that. I try to do it with partners and allies. Not only am I working with sort of the SEAC level leaders from every nation in the Indo-Pacific, but if they invite me to come speak and be a keynote speaker or a guest speaker at one of their events and visit their troops alongside those moments when I'm visiting some of our troops, for example, if I go to U.S. Forces Japan, not only do I meet with the senior enlisted leader from USFJ and speak to the U.S. service members on the ground, I'll try to carve out time to go visit the SEAC from Japan, and he'll set up a sort of a mentoring session, a Q&A session with many of their Japanese senior enlisted leaders. So wherever I can carve out time to do that, that's probably priority one for me. I try to always do that.
Yeah, that's great. You and I were talking a little earlier before I hit record about the digital medium and recording podcasts, of all of those things where you're sitting there and you're hosted by that senior enlisted leader at the National Guard, and you're talking to if you just record all of that, because that's what this is. It's just, you're doing it all the time, and we start recording it, and God, there's just so much valuable information out there that just gets lost. I'm again off on the tangent here, but
no, I love that idea. I wish I could record them all, because frankly, every time I do that, I get some really tough questions from someone younger than me who's way smarter than me, and they're diving in on something I've said or on a policy or something that they've seen happen in the theater. And it could be from a component, from a U.S. service member, could be from a partner or an ally. I get a lot of really great questions that make me think hard, that make me a better leader. And again, my belief in being a lifelong learner, if I don't know the answer, I go find it, and I get back to them with an answer. I think I love doing that kind of thing. And I wish I could record it, because I think I learn something every time I speak.
One of the most popular episodes I have on the podcast is when I just mic'd up, almost like the NFL, when they mic people up. I mic'd up then Lieutenant General Bellin and then Sergeant Major Ruiz, and talking to a class of second lieutenants at the basic school. And I hadn't been to the basic school in 30 years. And I'm sitting, and I'll tell you what, I'm using my air quotes here for listeners. Kids these days, they're not scared to ask questions like I was, right? Like nobody says,
right.
God, can you believe he asked that question? If they want to know the answer, they will ask the question. They're not scared to ask it.
That's a fact.
Yeah. And I noticed it because when I recorded, you can listen to, like, you hear these lieutenants ask some questions to a 3-star general. It's like, man, all I wanted to do was get underneath the desk when a 3-star general came in. So, but
that's right. Yeah. And I see the same thing with junior enlisted members as well. I speak frequently with young enlisted service members inside the command, outside the command, at the components, or even on the west coast of the U.S., where I go visit those who provide troops in to support the Indo-Pacific. Man, get some really bright enlisted junior service members asking some really great questions, and they're not afraid to speak up and ask those tough questions.
Yeah, I think it's a compliment when you get asked a tough question, because it means they really want to know what you think.
Yeah.
That's an ultimate compliment. So
yeah.
I saw on your bio that you went to a couple of PME classes. You went to Command Master Chief course, and then you went to the Joint Special Operations Senior Enlisted Academy. I don't know what happens in either of those courses, so this is where the question comes from. But what are some of the things that you learned in each of those that were different? And did they make a difference in your development as a leader? Because they sound like two distinctly different courses, but kind of the same also.
Yeah, the Command Master Chief course is the Navy course that is designed to prepare a Master Chief to step into that role as a Command Master Chief, right? So, some of it gets focused on Navy programs, policy, things that you may face, disciplinary, you name the thing that you may run into when you're at that command level. That's preparing you for that. Just SOFC ran out of the Joint Special Operations University down in Tampa, sits next to the SOCOM headquarters. Man, one of the best courses I've been to, at one of the best learning institutions that I've had a chance to visit and be a part of. And they have a follow-on course called Summit. Very similarly, it is focused on the joint environment. It's soft focused, but has great application across the entire force. And it's attended, of course, by primarily SOF, but they often invite others into it. And you may even have some 5i partners in there as well. And that's what made it so great, was not only are they really pushing you to learn and testing you in just OFSI, for example, you may be writing an essay, writing a paper about a topic that's relevant to a theater, but those partners and allies that are in the course with you, those other service members from other services that are in there with you, talk about learning a lot about our joint force. Man, it was just, I can't say enough great things about the way that SOCOM put together the Joint Special Operations University and the courses that they run for both enlisted and officer. It's really phenomenal.
That's awesome. There's a couple of things that kind of fascinate me about the community that you came out of. I have a couple of questions on this, but one of them is, and maybe this exists in the Marine Corps now because we have MARSOC, but when you're leading others in your Navy SEAL team, you're basically leading people who have proven that they have what it takes to be the top 1% of the 1%. But that must introduce some interesting leadership challenges as well, like leading people who are already that capable. See, in my mind, I think like, I've got 18-year-old Lance Corporals and things like that, but you're pretty flat there in the Navy SEAL community in terms of people proving that they're capable of being the top 1%. But that has to introduce some leadership challenges. Am I crazy, or does that exist?
It does exist, but I will say there's a tremendous amount of respect for experience and what a person brings to the table. And so as a new guy, speaking about me specifically, I have a lot of great ideas as a new guy, but I also recognized that here's a guy that's done 6, 8 deployments, multiple platoons, traveled all over the place, done every job in the platoon, knows it inside and out. It's humbling. And as a new guy, you're a little hesitant to speak up. At least I was. I was again, just really impressed with that depth and breadth of experience that others bring to it. And so you do get a bit of almost a pecking order in that tiered system of new guys, and then the layer above them of guys that have been around for 1 or 2 platoons, then others that have been there for many more. I mean, I think it's a little bit that way for officers as well. It can be daunting for a young officer, especially in the assistant OIC position, or sometimes there's even a third officer in a platoon. That's tough, right? Because you're an officer, you're expected to lead, but you don't have a lot of depth and breadth of experience, and you're surrounded by at least a few of the SEALs, at the older ones in the platoon. I mean, they may have 6, 8, 10, 12 deployments and platoons under their belt. It's challenging, and it's humbling, again, because it's less about what rank you're wearing, and it's about the talent, the experiences, the depth and breadth of all that you bring to the table that really, I think, shapes a leader.
Yeah. So I have some limited experience being around some Navy SEAL teams, and we've talked offline, and I'll say on the podcast, one of the most formative people in my life as a junior officer was the chief of the Navy SEAL platoon when I was embarked on a Marine Expeditionary Unit. And I learned more from Mark Crampton than I learned from anybody else at that point in my life. And, he's tragically gone, and maybe this is my way of memorializing him for a quick second, but gosh, I remember him sitting down, like just coming up to my stateroom, because I was right across from the 2 Navy officers. And he was like, "Hey, sir, I had an idea for you." And like would sit down. Next thing you know, like an hour's gone by, and we completely revamped some of my SOPs in my Anglico team. Like it was such a great guy. But one of the differences between the Marines and the Navy is like there's somehow the casual leadership in the Navy SEAL community works, because you're talking about like your skills versus the rank. But at some point, sometimes things snap back into that leadership triangle, right? Sometimes things snap back into, like, I'm thinking like an NJP or something like that. What's hard about that? Because in my civilian world, I have 18-year-old interns that call me Dave. It's no problem. They know exactly who's in charge. I don't have that problem. So I'm curious. I have this sort of a little bit of experience with that casual leadership, but it is hard. I'm curious what your opinion is on that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll go back to your opening comment there about Mark Crampton. I mean, I think anybody that knew him would have a story like you just described, where he was such an impact on them. He was just such a great leader, mentor, teacher, caring human being, incredibly talented, brilliant thinker. And so anybody that was exposed to him would probably have a similar story. You're right. There is a level of casual connectivity, relationships. Officers and enlisted all go through buds together. You know each other very closely. You go through the same training together. You go into platoons together. There's a very close connection between officer and enlisted inside of the SEAL teams. And it's partially because of that pipeline that I just described.
Right.
But you're right. There has to be, this is the military, and we're conducting military operations where orders must be followed, and officers are in command. And so there has to be a constant sort of resetting and recognition of that. And I believe good senior enlisted leaders are always checking themselves. They're always checking themselves to make sure that they're not losing sight of that fact, that the commander is in charge, the commander is in command. Anything that any responsibilities that you carry, it is by, with, and through that commander that can delegate something to you and gives you and empowers you. And so I think good enlisted leaders are always kind of checking themselves, because hopefully what they're seeing is that their behavior, their responses, how they speak to that officer, if junior enlisted are seeing that, then that's shaping how those junior enlisted think about the officer and enlisted relationship. So it's a tightrope that you have to walk and be careful. You want to be close friends at every level. You want to build that cohesiveness, that incredibly close relationship that is so important when you're standing side by side on the battlefield together. You want to have that close relationship, but at the same time, you want to know that there's a defined understanding of who is in command, who is in charge, and how that works, right? So I think, there have been instances where senior enlisted leaders, maybe they've become accustomed to having an incredible amount of rope, and they've been accustomed to being given a tremendous amount of responsibility and allowed to run exercises and operations and lead at the forefront of the cutting edge. But you got to be careful about letting that go to your head or letting that cloud your vision about, hey, when an officer makes a command call, that's the call.
Right.
In the end, there's got to be that level of understanding of the relationship. And you mentioned EQ earlier. I think that's part of it, right? You got to be able to balance those two worlds, where the relationship, the closeness, the camaraderie, maybe you're out having beers together, you eat together, you hang out together a lot. But in the end, that's the commander, and the commander ultimately is in command.
A quick Mark Crampton story then on that, because what you just said kind of weighs into, this is a good story, but I got to know Mark and the other guys because somebody had this brilliant idea of, wouldn't it be great if we put Anglico teams into the ribs when the SEAL team had to get in the water and do a hydro recon or a GoPlat or a VBSS, because we could stay on the boats and call in air. Somebody thought that was a good idea. The officer takes it to the SEAL Team 3 commanding officer at the time, which was a young Lieutenant Commander McCraven. And his first words, staying in the office, he goes, so you want to have the Marine, you want to have Armstrong work with you on this. He said, his response was, go put him in the water. Right. So had to go out and do a swim test with all these guys. It's kind of funny because that was his test. If he can swim, I don't have a problem with it. And so then, of course, that's how I got to know Mark. And so we were on ship.
Did you pass the swim test?
I did. I think they just wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to sink to the bottom of the ocean if I fell off of a boat. Right. So had my gear on and the UDT vest, and they wanted to make sure that I could inflate it. And they taught me how to clean it and all that. I went through the whole thing, but and all six of us went through the whole thing. So I could fill the rest of this podcast with stories about that time in my life, but I'll truncate it here. We were on ship, and I didn't hear it. One of the SEALs in the team addressed, I think, either called me Armstrong or called me Dave. There was something, and Mark Crampton heard it. And for listeners, Mark Crampton was the chief of the SEAL platoon that I'm talking about. And he grabs the SEAL and he said, hey, listen, you can't do that with Captain Armstrong. The Marines are different. And he is either Captain Armstrong or he's sir, or if he lets you do it, you can call him skipper. But that's it, because you put him in a bad spot. And so now he's teaching this SEAL who probably hasn't been around Marines at all. It's like, hey, listen, if you start calling him something other than what his Marines call him, they're going to start doing it. And then you put Captain Armstrong in a bad spot because now he's got to deal with a disciplinary matter that you introduced. Do you see why that's bad?
Yeah, that's a great lesson, great teaching moment right there.
I was in shock because I didn't expect anybody to kind of stick up and do. You either do it yourself or it doesn't get done. But
And that's a classic Mark Crampton, again, teaching moment, and speaks to his just level
yeah,
of leadership and class. He was just a great leader.
sticking on this topic for just one more second. But what's some of the less obvious advice that you would have for a junior officer newly arriving to a command? Like, what unique challenges do they face in the Navy Special Warfare community that, say, a SWO wouldn't incur if they were checking on to their ship for the very first time?
Yeah, it really ties into the topic that you and I were just discussing. And my advice would be to, hey, you're going to want to be one of the boys. You're going to want to be liked. You're going to want to be loved. You're going to want to go drinking when they're drinking. You're going to want to hang out with them. You're going to want to be viewed. You're going to want to go to the tattoo parlor with them. You're going to want to be thought of in the same way that they think of each other. That's the level of love and respect and camaraderie that does exist inside of those small units like the SEAL teams. And my advice would be approach that with great caution. Approach that with great caution, because you don't want to blur the lines for them. You need to know that you're either in command now or you will be in command of them at some point. And you want to be cautious about blurring those lines to the point that it undermines your command authority and that they view you in a way that is too casual. I would just caution young officers, just be aware of that and be cautious about blurring the lines between the enlisted and the officer. I think that's important.
I think it's hard because, and now I'm reflecting on it through my officer lens, my memory officer lens here. I mean, everybody wants to be liked. It's just part of being a human being. I think you've got serious emotional problems if you don't want to be liked. So that, I think that is hard. And being liked is a line that you never get to back up from, because if you're engaging in wanting to be liked, you're going to find yourself in a position where you're going to have to do something that is disliked by everybody. And then you're way worse off than you were by just trying to maintain neutral buoyancy there. I think it's hard. How about some advice, also some less obvious advice for a chief petty officer or a leading petty officer who's picking up a brand new green officer? What's your advice to them?
For the chief petty officer, I think reinforcing to that chief their role in being that mentor and that teacher for someone that needs their help, but also being the reinforcer to help ensure they establish their authority in front of others. You want to empower them and to help reinforce that, because as a chief, you're the chief. When there's a question, they say, ask the chief. And so you need to be able to reinforce the credentials of that junior officer for your junior enlisted personnel. Because the junior enlisted, they're already going to have a tremendous amount of respect for you. And when they know that this young officer just showed up, maybe just came out of school, never done a deployment, doesn't know a lot, it would be easy to see some undermining happening there. And it'd be easy for a really talented, experienced chief to steal some of that empowerment from that officer with the junior enlisted. And so I think I'd reinforce to that chief, hey, you got to be a good mentor. You got to be a good swim buddy. You got to teach and help that officer in that relationship, but you also have to teach down. You got to make sure that the junior enlisted are seeing the importance of that officer's role, that their authority. You got to reinforce that every day.
You mentioned before, it was a half hour ago, but you mentioned the Chief's mess, the mythical Chief's mess, right? Now, when I mean the Chief's mess, I'm talking about the literal, like you're embarked, you're on a Navy ship, you're a Chief's mess, or there is a Chief's mess. What sort of lessons do you have to pass along to the petty officer first class who's getting ready to pin on chief and enter the Chief's mess? What sort of advice do you have for that sailor?
It's probably the biggest lesson that so there's a chief's season when you have an E6 that's been selected and awaiting for pinning. There's a period of training around 6 weeks long that they go through. And a lot of that is to put them into some really challenging situations that they have to learn from. There's some standard curriculum learning, et cetera, that happens. But one of the biggest teaching points in all of that is to learn to trust your chief's mess, to trust your peers, to know that they've got your back. Because again, there's this theme in the Navy about ask
Mm-hmm.
the chief, because the chief is going to be the all-knowing, all-powerful, has it all. And you and I know that that's just not possible. They can't, no one individual can know it all. Again, even if they're wearing 4 stars on their collar. And so the biggest lesson, I think, for those senior E6s that are about to put on E7 and become a chief is, hey, you gotta trust your teammates, trust your peers, know that they're for you, and you can always count on them. And so if you find yourself at a deficit or in a gap, don't hesitate to go turn to that chief's mess. And it doesn't have to be the chief's mess on your ship or at your command. You could find yourself in a faraway place, and everywhere you go, there's probably a chief's mess somewhere not far away, and they're there, and they'll welcome you with open arms. And if you've got questions or challenges or issues, they'll have some solutions they can help you with, because it really is a unique sort of fraternity / sorority / brotherhood, sisterhood that stretches the globe and is connected through time and space with some really great leaders, great experiences from across the full spectrum of the Navy, from subsurface to surface to aviation to NSW to EOD, CBs, you name it, right? Like, just depth and breadth of experience that can help make you a more complete leader.
Yeah, that was some really great advice I got my very first time I embarked onto a MEU and, went out for 6 months. I hadn't spent a whole lot of time on ship before then. And I remember my sergeant major, before I took the debt and got on ship, he said, "Hey, Captain Armstrong, if you have an issue on ship, don't ever bring it to the commander of troops or the ship's skipper until you get it into the chief's mess first." He's like, "You're just going to have to trust me on that." He's like, "If you have a problem, get it into the chief's mess first, because chances are that's where it's going to get fixed. And if you bring it to them first, it's different than if the skipper comes down and brings it to them." It's like, ooh, that's really good advice, especially because Marines haven't been spending that much time on ship in the past 20 years. But
Yeah,
that
yeah.
saved my bacon a couple of different times.
There's some real collective experience, and there's a good chance someone in that chief's mess may have already experienced the challenge that you're going to bring to them. They may very well be aware of the exact problem that you're describing. They may already have some insider knowledge on that. And so oftentimes a lot of things get solved there in that chief's mess that never even need to make it up to the commanding officer.
Yeah, you're right. They probably know about it before I even asked somebody to deal with it. So I didn't even think about it from that perspective. But you're right. They probably know, right? Between the Lance Corporal underground and the Chief's mess, they're probably, everybody's got
That's
every
right.
problem identified and solved already. So I'm late to the party. But I know we're coming up on the end of your time here. I have my one parting question for you. I kind of say this one at the end because this is a better question to ask you than any of my other guests. But we have this funny way in the military of revering the Mavericks, right? In fact, we made a fictional character named Maverick, right? And we revere them in one way while at the same time not being overly tolerant of them at the same time. So, what does a Maverick look like in your community? And did you ever have one of those Mavericks in your command, and how did you manage them or champion them?
Yeah, I mean, there is a pretty standard path to success in naval special warfare. And it
Mhm.
looks a lot like in the enlisted sort of ranks. There's the positions you do as a junior enlisted SEAL, and then an LPO, leading petty officer, and then a chief, and then as a troop chief at the E8 level, then as a master chief, and as a squadron master chief at the O5 level, and then as a group O6 level master chief. There's this pretty defined path, and it's even, it's written out in guidance and documents that say this is the path you need to take. If you want to promote, here's the things that you need to do. And anyone that will deviate from that path can do so at great risk, because it could take your career offline. It could take you off track. It could put you into a unpromotable scenario. And I've seen several where whether it was personal life issues that required them to come offline and deal with family things, sometimes that becomes unrecoverable. But others who have chosen to go that other route, and a great example inside of the SEAL community might be those who pursued a path into the realm of human intelligence. There's not a standard pathway defined in our promotion standards that probably gives the level of credit to that individual for what they have to do to pursue that path. And so I think, we've seen some that pursue a path like that, or others where their willingness to stick it out, to do those hard things, do those hard jobs, and to deviate from that standard path, I commend them for doing that, because our community needs those types of diverse leaders. Because that deviation from the standard path, when that person eventually becomes a 06 level group master chief, maybe a master chief at Naval Special Warfare Group 1 or Group 2, their depth and breadth and the fact that they've deviated from that path, they're going to have probably some real meaningful experiences that can help solve tough problems and thinking about the world in a different way. If you had a standard SEAL career that took you from a platoon and up in through the SEAL teams and into a group position, you may have missed some things to your left and your right, and you may not have a lot of depth or breadth. And so it's pretty important, I think, to have that diversity and understanding of all the other aspects of what's happening out there. And sometimes I would carry that one step further. And I encourage this even now as I talk to SEALs, and that is, hey, go take a challenging joint tour. Go somewhere and lead others than just SEALs. Go out and lead in a position where you have to lead Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, Space, Coast Guard. Those challenges will make you a better leader. And I would say that to enlisted and officer, and I know it's mandated for officers. You gotta get your joint training, you gotta do your joint tours. That exposure to those others has, I think, made me more successful, made me a better leader, hopefully maybe a better human being. And I would encourage everyone to don't back away from those challenges. Get outside your comfort zone, go find those hard tours that are different and maybe off that beaten path, because you'll learn a lot from doing that.
What people don't realize until they have it is that their personal network that you create when you're in the military, if it's siloed, you lose the opportunity of having a much more broad network, especially when you're getting ready to retire or get out or anything. I always found that when I went to Army schools, I would meet Army officers and Army enlisted that ended up staying in my orbit to this day, even, being retired.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just think that if you look at it also in terms of like creating your own chief's mess, your own personal chief's mess of people that can solve problems for you, that's one of the benefits of broadening your experience too.
Yeah, I love that, because I'll tell you that the network piece, it's important for me, not from the aspect of having a network, it's from having mentors. My ability to have those around me from all the other services that I've worked with, to be able to tap into their background, their knowledge, their experiences, that's been huge for me during my development as a leader. And even now, as I think towards retirement, the ability to, I was on the phone just recently with a former chief of staff at Special Operations Command North, SOC North out in Colorado Springs. And he's an Army guy. He's got a whole different perspective on the world. And as a mentor, hugely valuable for me. I fully appreciate that idea of a network and the importance of it when you think about having others who can mentor you and make you better.
Yeah. Final question, because I know you're getting ready to retire. Any thoughts on retirement? What are some of the lessons that you're learning right now about preparing for retirement? Is there something you say like, geez, I wish I started this 6 months ago, or I didn't know this, or if I was going to tell somebody who's 3 years out from retiring, here's some things I would have done earlier. Any suggestions based on your experience?
Yeah, I think I probably should have started preparing earlier. I could have done, there's obviously a standard checklist of things you have to accomplish as you get to that time frame. And I've delayed it too long, and I've laid out a very painful path that I'm going to have to follow now. That includes still working in this job and traveling and doing all the things that I've laid out right up until just before my retirement date. There's not going to be a lot of time for me to focus on that. So yeah, I would say start earlier, think about it earlier, start laying out your plan a little bit sooner, keep building that network, find mentors from outside of your community, maybe outside of your service, maybe even outside of the military, get some other perspectives. It's a great big world out there, and there's some really smart, talented people, and they're all many of them are just itching to help you. You just need to meet them and ask for their help, and you'll find that there are some really good Americans, great Americans out there that want to help you as a military member make that transition successfully into the civilian world, because there's a lot of respect for our military across the civilian workforce and in the civilian
Yeah.
world. So I think tapping into that's pretty important. Get those mentors
Yeah.
and start early.
Yeah, and just get some experience from people that have already done it too. But if you're standing there and there's a bucket of water on the ground that says "I miss it," and there's a bucket of water on the ground that says "I'm so happy I'm out," do you think when you retire you'll have a foot in each bucket, or will you be firmly in the I'm done and I'm out?
No, I absolutely will miss it. It's been,
Yeah,
again, going back to my comments about being lucky, about being surrounded by great teammates, working for great leaders, the chance to lead brilliant young service members every day, the places I've been, the people I've met. I'm going to miss it tremendously. It's been an incredible career, incredible experience, and I'm going to miss it a lot. But at the same time, I'm very excited about the challenge of the future and what's
yeah,
next. I think that's exciting. The idea of maybe dabbling in some entrepreneurial opportunities, starting something new, trying something different is always exciting, to build something from the ground up. So I'm very excited about that as well. But yeah, I'll have a foot in each of those buckets. Miss it a
yeah,
lot, but excited about the challenges ahead.
yeah. Well, thanks so much for your time on this. Thanks so much for your willingness to help the emerging leaders be better by sharing your experiences and your moments in leadership. This has been fascinating. I do hope that we get a chance to get together and actually have a beer when you're back in the DC area. I think if you and I and Sergeant Major Ruiz were able to get together and have a drink and a cigar, we'd get the three people that have been on this podcast with the best hair between the three of us. We would have the
I think his hair's better
his
than mine and yours.
it's good. I know it's good. Even I'm jealous of it. So
He's a good man.
yeah, he is. He is. I enjoy his company too. So well, thanks again for all this. Appreciate it. Good luck with everything in your retirement. Reach out anytime I can do anything for you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dave. It's really been a pleasure. Really appreciate everything. Awesome conversation, and thanks for what you're doing to spread the message, to help train, educate, prepare others to be leaders. The work you're doing is really important, and I just